in a way you could say it's become our mutual fate to willingly or unwillingly be in the midst of a metamorphosis of life on Earth. When all of nature is in turmoil and storm, and when all of culture is in upheaval and conflict, it's a complete metamorphosis is needed in regard to both, and in order to bring the two back together again. And so, and because humans are implicated in most levels of the current crises in both nature and in culture, a transformation of humanity is required. That's one way to look at the world. That when everything goes wrong, when the world goes wrong, humans have to transform just as nature has to transform. And whereas change can mean to alter or to make different, to transform literally means to transition from one form to another form. And that's a radical thing. That's a big change. That's not something easily accomplished. And yet, the old stories say, it is the nature of our soul to transform, that our souls came here not to become steady, not to fit in somewhere, but to transform. And the thing we're supposed to transform into is our original core self, the authentic self within us. What we're trying to become, what we need to become, what we're longing to be in touch with is something authentically inside us. I'm just telling the old stories and turning them slightly into psychology. So when the world transforms, we're expected to transform. And so that becomes a complicated thing that first has to be imagined. And you could say that one of the first problems we encounter when we want to change meaningfully or transform is the limitations of the ego or the little self within. Because the little self, the ego, has a tremendous fear of change. And actually, the little self fears that it will be annihilated if there's a major change. At least that's one way to look at it, that the ego forms early in life, and it forms in reaction to a sense of overwhelm in its own little realm. And so the ego is really arranged partially to never feel that overwhelm, to never feel that sense of annihilation again. And yet, we are here to transform. And so that means we have an internal battle between the fears, the apprehensions of the little self, and the capacity to change, to heal, to grow, and to transform that exists in the soul and the deeper self. And when the world outside us is in turmoil, it intensifies the conflicts within us. And that happens whether we're paying attention to the news or not, because the soul takes in all kinds of information in subtle ways. At a certain point, we have to accept that we are implicated in the upheaval, that we are not able really to get away from it, and that our real task is to turn away from the roaring and turn towards the struggle to transform and become an authentic version of our own self. So the fact that the storms in nature are growing bigger and the conflicts in culture are growing greater is really can be seen as an indication that the two things are deeply entwined. The modern world separates nature and imagines humans as separate from nature when human nature is deeply connected to nature. That was the understanding in all the traditional cultures. Modern people have that turned around, and there was the fascination, or really the kind of inflation of the modern psyche, which thought that it could take over the world, that it knew better than nature, that it could dominate nature, and that it could rule the planet. And look what's happened. Everything's gone awry, because that's not the way it's supposed to work. As a matter of fact, the fate of humanity has always depended upon how we read and how we understand the living text of nature. Human cultures before modern times were connected to nature. They were influenced by nature. They learned to read nature, and they were educated and taught by nature. Now we have to be taught by the storms of nature, as if in some kind of desperate attempt to help us to awaken to what we're supposed to be doing, which is to become true versions of ourselves. And in doing that, our human nature becomes reconnected to great nature.